Hello and welcome. This is Pre-Uni New College. This lesson is intended to provide information about thinking skills and how to solve these questions through strategical steps. These logical explanations and solutions will be beneficial, however, please be advised it does not give all the answers to solving the thinking skills questions. Most importantly, consistently studying and reading are essential for successful results. Pre-Uni New College has always taught strategies and tips to students on how to approach questions, and this lesson is intended to guide and benefit you. This lesson and guideline about thinking skills is not intended as a shortcut to understand the thinking skills exam. Students must study consistently to achieve successful results. Now let's begin the lesson. Welcome everyone to Part 2-1 of Problem-Solving Strategy for Thinking Skills. In this part, we will be going through the types of problem-solving questions you may encounter. We will also be learning some tips to solve these problem-solving questions. There are 3 types of problem-solving questions in thinking skills. They are finding the procedures, identifying similarity, and relevant selections. We will be covering finding procedures in this lesson. What are finding procedure questions? Finding procedure questions are questions in which students need to find a method or procedure in order to solve for the solution. These questions rely on students' knowledge in a variety of mathematical concepts and processes, as well as their skill in using these different methods. If we break down each word of the question, finding is the action of discovering, locating, and detecting. Procedures is a series of actions conducted in a certain order or manner in order to solve the question. Essentially, after breaking down each word, we are looking for an appropriate procedure using relevant information for the question. This is called critical thinking, and then use our understanding of mathematical operations to solve the question. Finding procedure questions typically use the following mathematical concepts in which students should have a strong grasp of. These include mixed number operations, number concepts, simple number operations, table and graph, and verbal data processing. In this lesson, we will be covering the first 3 in detail. A mixed number operation question requires students to problem solve with different mathematical operators and calculation skills. Consider the following example. There are 20 people in one WEMT class. There are 5 WEMT classes on Saturday, but last Saturday in each class, 5 students were absent. How many students were present last Saturday? To solve this question, make sure you understand the information. Then analyze the data and relate it back to the question. And then lastly, figure out what procedure should be used to solve the question. In other words, which number operations should we use? The solution of the question is as follows. The total number of students is 20 times 5, because there are 20 people in each class and that there are 5 classes, so there are 100 students in total. There are 25 absent students. There is 5 absent students in each class. There are 5 classes, so 5 times 5 is equal to 25. So therefore, the number of students present is 100 minus 25, and that results in 75. Next, we can look at number concepts question. A number concepts question requires students to make deductions using number knowledge and given information, covering a variety of topics. Consider the following example. To get to Pre-Uni New College, I have to take a train that departs at 9 a.m. and arrives at 9:40 a.m. Driving a car would be twice as fast. How long would it take to get to Pre-Uni College if I drove a car? To solve this question, make sure you understand the information and the number concepts used. Then analyze the data and relate it back to the question. Lastly, figure out what procedure needs to be used to solve the question. In other words, which number processes should we use? The solution of the question is as follows. The train ride takes 40 minutes. We do 9:40 a.m. minus 9 a.m. 9 a.m. is when they departed and 9:40 is when they arrived, so it takes 40 minutes on the train. The car ride would take 40 minutes divided by 2, because we know that the car ride would be twice as fast. So that means the time it takes would be twice as small. So divided by 2, we get 20 minutes. So therefore the car ride would equal 20 minutes. And the last concept that we will go through in this lesson is simple number operations. A simple number operation question requires students to utilize mathematical operators to problem solve, covering a variety of topics. Consider the following example. In the first term, there were 100 students at Pre-Uni New College. If the number of students increases by 20 every term, how many students are there in term 4? To solve this question, make sure you understand the information. Then analyze the data and relate it back to the question. Lastly, figure out what procedures should be used to solve the question. In other words, which operator should be used to finish the question. The solution is as follows. In term 2, there would be 100 plus 20, 120 students. Term 3, we add another 20 and we get 140. And lastly, in term 4, we do 140 plus 20 and we should get 160 students in term 4. Now, when looking at problem-solving questions, we have this following general approach that can be used to solve them. Let's look at how we would apply these tips to finding procedure questions. The first step is to read the question. If you misunderstand or misinterpret the question, your solution may be incorrect. The second step is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. In problem-solving questions, many pieces of information will be provided and all related. Therefore, a thorough understanding of the question is necessary. The third step is to identify and process which pieces of information are needed to solve the question. In many questions, much more information than needed is available and provided, and identifying which of the following information is not necessary is important. The fourth step is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. Presenting information in different ways helps to recognize patterns and gain further insight. And the last step is to solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. Using the necessary concepts, mathematical concepts and processes that you know to find the solution. Now let's look at this example of a mixed number operations finding procedure question from the selective sample thinking skills exam. Yesterday, in the dog park, I saw 8 dog owners exercising their dogs. Some of the dog owners had 1 dog and some dog owners had 2 dogs. Counting the legs of the dogs and the legs of the dog owners, there was a total of 60 legs. All dogs have 4 legs and all dog owners have 2 legs. How many dog owners had 1 dog? This question falls in the finding procedures question category, as this question requires students to use their calculation skills and find a procedure using mathematical operators to solve the question. Then, let's apply the general approach method we just learnt to solve this question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking how many dog owners had only 1 dog, we want to determine the number of dog owners with only 1 dog from the information provided. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand 3 things. The number of dog owners at the park, that it is possible that dog owners have either 1 or 2 dogs, the number of legs a dog and an owner has. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information is needed. From this question, there are 3 key pieces of information. Key information 1 is that there are 8 dog owners. Key information 2 is that the person saw 60 legs, dogs and their owners. And lastly, key information 3 is that we need to find the number of dog owners that only had 1 dog. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, however, the data and information has already been presented in a clear way. It is now a matter of correctly using and representing and extending this data. If we put it in a table or any other sort of form, it may be more time-consuming and unhelpful for us to solve the question. And finally, step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. We have now found and identified a procedure in order to solve the question. It is now a matter of applying the appropriate number concepts. Firstly, we calculate the number of dog owner legs. There are 8 dog owners, so the number of legs there are is 8 dog owners times 2, which is equal to 16 legs. So 16 of the legs is from the 8 dog owners. Then we can calculate the number of dog legs. We know that there is a total of 60 legs, so 60 legs minus 16 legs is 44 legs. So 44 legs is contributed from the dogs. Then we can calculate the number of dogs. We know that each dog has 4 legs, so 44 divided by 4 is 11 dogs. To calculate the number of dog owners that had only 1 dog, we can do 11 dogs minus 8 dog owners, which is equal to 3 dog owners with 2 dogs. Therefore, 8 minus 3 is equal to 5. So therefore, there are 5 dog owners with only 1 dog. Let's continue and look at this example of another mixed number operation question from the Opportunity Class Sample Thinking Skills exam. Daniel wants to make as many cupcakes as possible from the ingredients he has at home. The recipe to make 8 cupcakes needs 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of sugar, 100 grams of butter, and 2 eggs. At home, he has 600 grams of flour, 500 grams of sugar, 300 grams of butter, and 5 eggs. What is the maximum number of cupcakes Daniel can make? This question falls in the Finding Procedures question category, as this question provides information and a few numerical numbers that students will need to operate on. In addition to this, students will most likely need to represent their information in another way in order to gain a better understanding of the question, looking for an appropriate procedure as well as use a number of mathematical concepts to correctly solve the question. Then, let's apply the general approach method to solve the question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking us what is the maximum number of cupcakes Daniel can make, we are looking for an appropriate procedure to find out the maximum number of cupcakes Daniel is able to make. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand that 1. The recipe of cupcakes that Daniel uses is provided with the relevant measurements, and we also understand that Daniel has larger amounts of ingredients at home than he can use. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information is needed. From this question, there are 2 key pieces of information. Key information 1 is, using the ingredients that he has, Daniel wants to make as many cupcakes as possible. And key information 2 is that the current recipe that Daniel uses only makes 8 cupcakes. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, the data/information has been listed. However, as we continue to solve through this question, it is easier to organize our information by using a table to clearly see patterns and gain a better understanding of the question. So we notice that the original recipe that makes 8 cupcakes requires 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of sugar, 100 grams of butter, and 2 eggs. But what we have is a lot more. And using a table helps us directly compare this. Finally, let's solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. We have found and identified a procedure in order to solve the question. It is now a matter of applying the appropriate number concepts. Firstly, as all the amounts of ingredients Daniel has at home are different, we need to individually find out how many cupcakes can potentially be made with each ingredient. We have made an extra column to show this information and also written how we were able to come to this conclusion. For example, Seeing that Daniel has 600 grams of flour at home, there is 6 times the amount of flour needed to make cupcakes. Therefore, we can multiply 6 times 8 cupcakes to find that using 600 grams, we can technically make 48 cupcakes with that amount of flour. This process is then repeated for each ingredient. So we have 500 grams of sugar, which is 5 times the amount that is needed. So technically, with that amount of sugar, we should be able to make 40 cupcakes, and so on and so on. So therefore, we can notice that the maximum number of cupcakes that Daniel can make is 20. But before we continue to solve the question and find out the maximum amount of cupcakes Daniel can make, we need to first understand that all ingredients are needed to make cupcakes. Just because there is enough flour to make 48 cupcakes, it does not mean that there would be enough eggs to make 48 cupcakes. Therefore, the maximum amount of cupcakes that can be made is 20 cupcakes, as mentioned before, because eggs is the smallest amount of ingredients Daniel has, which ensures that there will be enough of all the ingredients. Therefore, option C is the correct answer. Now let's move on to look at this example of a number concepts questions from the selective test sample thinking skills exam. We have that Kai, Joe, and Alice have 30 marbles each. They take in turns to roll a dice. If the number rolled is even, then the player has to give the number of marbles shown on the face of the dice to each of the other 2 players. If the number rolled is odd, then the player receives the number of marbles shown on the face of the dice from each of the other 2 players. Kai rolls a 5 and Joe rolls a 2. If the friends end up with 41, 20, and 29 marbles respectively, which number does Alice roll? This question falls in the finding procedures question category, as this question provides information and a few numerical numbers that students will need to operate on. In addition to this, students will most likely need to represent the information in another way in order to gain a better understanding of the question, looking for an appropriate procedure as well as use a number of mathematical concepts to correctly solve this question. Now let's apply the general method we have learnt to solve this question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking us if the friends end up with 41, 20, and 29 marbles respectively, which number does Alice roll? We want to determine the number that Alice has rolled to obtain the final number of marbles by using a certain method. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand the conditions of rolling an even or odd number with the dice and what the other 2 members have rolled already. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information is needed. From this question, there are 3 key pieces of information. The key information 1 is that if there is an even roll, the player has to give number of marbles shown on the dice to the other 2. If an odd roll, then the player gets the number of marbles shown from the other 2. Key information 2 is that the 3 friends finish with 41, 20, and 29 marbles, and key information 3 is that Kai rolled a 5 and Joe rolled a 2. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, we can analyze the data using a flowchart after each person rolls a dice. So each person starts with 30. After Kai rolls a 5, Joe and Alice have to give 5 marbles to Kai. So that results in 30 plus 10. So Kai has 40 marbles after that. Joe has 25 and Alice only has 25 as well. After Joe rolls a 2, he has to give Kai and Alice 2 marbles, resulting with 42 marbles for Kai, 21 marbles for Joe, and 27 marbles for Alice. And when Alice rolls X, Kai ends up with 41, Joe ends with 20, and Alice ends up with 29. The key part here is that Kai decreases, Joe decreases, but Alice increases. So that tells us something. Now, step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. Kai decreases by 1 marble, Joe decreases by 1 marble, and Alice increases by 2. Therefore, we can conclude that Alice rolled 1 marble. That she rolled 1 dice. Remember that when it's an odd roll, that the player gets the marbles, and if it's an even roll, the player has to give marbles. So knowing that Alice has increased and everybody else has decreased tells us that Alice rolled an odd number, and therefore we definitely know that Alice rolled a 1. Now let's look at this example of a number concepts question from the Opportunity Class Sample Thinking Skills exam. A slow train departed from Lode at 1 p.m. and arrived at Braxton at 7 p.m. An express train departed from Lode later and arrived at Braxton at the same time as the slow train. The express train was 4 times as fast as the slow train. Each train travelled at a constant speed and did not stop along the way. When did the express train depart from Lode? This question falls in the Finding Procedures question category, as this question provides information and a few numerical numbers that students will need to operate on. In addition to this, students will need to look for an appropriate procedure, as well as use a number of mathematical concepts to correctly solve the question. Now let's apply the general method to solve the question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking, when did the express train depart from Lode, we want to determine the time the train departed. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand the time it takes the slow train to get from Lode to Braxton, the arrival time at Braxton of the express train, and the speed of the express compared to the normal. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information is needed. From this question, there are 3 key pieces of information. The slow train departed at 1 p.m. and arrived at 7 p.m. Key information 2 is the express train arrived at Braxton at 7 p.m. and key information 3 is that the express train is 4 times faster than the slow train. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, the information is already stated in a clear way. Putting it in a table or any other form may be time-consuming and might be unhelpful for you to solve the question. And finally, step 5. Step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. Firstly, let's find the slow train trip. The slow train trip takes 7 p.m. minus 1 p.m. It takes 6 hours. The express train trip is 6 hours divided by 4, which is 1.5 hours. Remember that if the express train is 4 times faster, it means it takes 4 times less to get to Braxton than the slow train. So we know that 7 p.m. minus a certain time, minus the departure time, should equal to 1.5 hours. So 7 p.m. minus 5:30 p.m. is 1.5 hours, so therefore the express train must have departed Lode at 5:30 p.m. Let's continue and look at this example of a simple number operations question from the Opportunity Class Sample Thinking Skills exam. This question So a farmer has 25 female goats. This year, all but 9 of them have kids. None of them have had more than 2 kids. 357 kids have been born in total. How many of the goats have had only 1 kid? This question falls in the Finding Procedures category, as this question provides information and a few numerical numbers that students will need to operate on. In addition to this, students will need to look for an appropriate procedure, as well as use a number of mathematical concepts to correctly solve the question. Then, let's apply the general method to solve this question. The first step is to read the question. The question says, how many of the goats have 1 kid only? We want to determine the number of goats that only have 1 kid. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand the total number of goats, the number of goats who don't have kids, and the total number of kids born. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information is needed. Key information 1 is that there are 245 goats, but 9 didn't have kids. Key information 2 is that goats can have either 1 or 2 kids, and key information 3 is that there are 257 kids. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, the information is already stated in a clear way. Putting it in a table or any other form may be more time-consuming and unhelpful to solve the question. And lastly, step 5 is to solve the question using the appropriate number of concepts and procedures. Firstly, the number of female goats who gave birth is 245 minus 9, which is equal to 236 goats. Female goats who have 2 kids is 357 minus 236. So there are 121 goats who have 2 kids. So the number of female goats who have 1 kid is therefore 236 minus 121, which is equal to 115. Now let's continue and look at this example of a simple number operations question from the Opportunity Class Sample Thinking Skills exam. A piece of string initially held end to end in a straight line. A mark is made in the middle of the string. The string is then folded in half and the new ends again pulled tight. A mark is made in the middle of the strands of the folded string, and this process is then repeated a 3rd time. The string is then unfolded and its end pulled so that it is once again in its initial straight line. The distance between marks on the string is found to be 4 centimeters. How long is the piece of string? This question falls in the finding procedure question category, as this question provides information and a few numerical numbers that students will need to operate on. In addition to this, students will most likely need to represent the information in another way to help solve the question. Then let's apply the general approach method to solve the question. The first step is to read the question and determine what it is asking. Since it is asking us how long is the piece of string, we want to determine the final length of the string by using correct processes. Step 2 is to understand the problem that needs to be solved. Looking at the information provided in the question, we can see and understand the process that has been conducted, what we have to measure, and the space between the marks that will help us determine the complete length of the string. Next is to identify and process which pieces of information is needed. From this question, there are 2 key pieces of information. Key information 1 is the string is marked 3 times. Key information 2 is that the marks on the string are 4 centimeters apart. Step 4 is to analyze the data and represent it in different ways. In this question, the information can be put into a diagram, which can be helpful. As we continue to fold the string in half, we will denote where the marks are with a red line. So firstly, with our complete string, we will draw 1 mark firstly in the middle. That will result in 1 red line. When we fold it in half, there will be 2 layers on top of each other. And when we draw a line in the middle, we will get 2 extra marks, which will result in 3 marks in total, because we have the 2 marks on the 2 overlapping layers, and we also remember the original mark. When we fold it again, we will result in 1, 2, 3, 4 layers on top of each other. When we draw a line all through it, through the middle, then we get 4 extra marks. And as a result, we should get 7 marks. In total, we have the first one from the original, the extra 2, and then the 4. Now, step 5 is where we solve the question using the appropriate number concepts and processes. The 7 marks result with 8 gaps on the string. We know that the length of the gap is 4 centimeters. Therefore, the total length of the string would be 8 gaps times 4 centimeters, which is equal to 32 centimeters. Thank you for watching this lesson, and hopefully it has helped you understand a bit about problem-solving skills in thinking skills, and the strategies on how to solve these questions. Please note, as stated in the start of the lesson, studying and reading consistently are essential for successful outcomes.